I will have those military options. I will take those crippling sanctions and put them in place, and I will speak out to the Iranian people about the peril of them becoming nuclear. It's pretty straightforward in my view. If Barack Obama gets reelected, Iran will have a nuclear weapon, and the world will change.
Mitt Romney has now discovered a bigger problem in the world than Iran.
If he's planning on doing more and suggests to Russia that he has things he's willing to do with them, he's not willing to tell the American people. This is to Russia. This is, without question, our #1 geopolitical foe.
Joining me now, MSNBC's Rachel Maddow, host of The Rachel Maddow Show, and now the author of Drift, The Unmooring of American Military Power. Now, Rachel.
Yes.
I noticed that in our politics, in our world, nothing has really changed between Romney saying Iran is the worst thing in the world and now Russia is the worst thing. The only thing that I've seen happen is the publication of your book, Drift, by Rachel Maddow. Did he read something in this book that got him suddenly really anti-Russian?
He read about Reagan's private, outside the CIA cabal of Team B zealots who were telling him that Russia had all this stuff they didn't have so we could justify a giant defense budget? Maybe.
Yeah,
maybe he's thinking about reviving those guys? That's possible.
It is amazing that Mitt Romney can flip like that on just as soon as he hears something to exploit in foreign policy. What does that give you, based on your work here in the book and just in watching it in general? Mitt Romney as manager of foreign policy is not something we've been discussing. What's your sense of how that would go if the country made that mistake?
He is not a guy who has ever prioritized foreign policy. He sort of inherited the George W. Bush foreign policy advisors in terms of who he brought on in the campaign. But there is a way in which he's trying to sell himself as presidential enough to make a plausible foreign policy gut check kind of argument. And so he talks about, I will tell the Iranian people. And we're all meant as the American people to think, are the Iranians going to listen to him? Mm-hmm. Like, is that what Iran is waiting for, to hear from Mitt Romney what's in their best interests? And he thinks that we're going to look at him and think that. And it's something that Republicans traditionally over the course of our lifetime have thought that they've had the advantage on. I don't think they have the advantage on it anymore. But it's interesting to try to see these guys compete with each other without much competing about foreign policy this time around, you know?
I want to read something from one of my favorite pages of the book, because it's a Senate debate on the first Iraq War, a debate that I was there for on the Senate floor, and it was one of the most ennobling debates I witnessed. There was no questioning people's motivations. Some people were in favor of giving the president the authority to do it. Others were opposed, a very significant vote opposed to it, and no one called anybody names, and you note that in here. And I want to read something that Senator Don Regal said. He said, at that time, war is about fire and steel and people dying. If the sons and daughters of all of us, of the president, the vice president, the cabinet, were all over there in the Persian Gulf right now, right up on the front line, and we're going to be part of that first assault wave that would go on into Kuwait, I think we'd be taking more time. I think we'd be working harder on the sanctions policy. I think we'd be trying to squeeze Saddam Hussein in every other way that we could, short of a shooting war. And it turns out that Don Regal was on to one of the themes of this book, which is that we have disconnected war from the American experience of 99% of this population. And
I'm so glad that you zoomed in on that, because both Regal's point and the fact that that point was being made and what you describe as an ennobling debate, that's exactly how I see it. That was the right kind of debate to have, because Congress still had some sense that whether or not we started that war would depend on them. And so they debated it as if Americans' lives depended on it, because that was true. And that's the way that the Constitution is set up in terms of how we're supposed to make democratically inflected decisions about national security. Yeah, we've got a military leader, a commander-in-chief in the president, but it is the representatives of the people who are supposed to decide this thing. And so to have that real debate before we started that war in a way that was not hyper-partisan and that was hard thought and that ferreted out weaknesses in both sides of the argument, that's the way it's supposed to be. And so, I don't mean to make it seem like Gulf War I was perfect. This book is isn't about what war is a good war and what war is a bad war. It's about whether or not we feel engaged. And that was such a shorter war and had such less of an impact on us as a country and in terms of our national security compared to the second Iraq war. But consider the difference in how connected we as a people felt to Gulf War I compared to how separate we felt from this last 8.5 years in Iraq.
And as that debate shows, we were much more sober about the consequences, the possible consequences ahead of time.
Yeah.
Are you taking personal questions about the book?
Yes.
Where did you find time to do this? I don't have time to read the paper. How did you do
see
this?
You see this?
Oh,
Yeah, that's what it is. Now, I worked on it I got this book contract before I got a job at MSNBC. I tried to give it back. I quit. I failed. I said, I can't do it. There's no way I can get it done. And eventually, my guilt wore me down, and I worked on it like a second job.
Rachel Maddow, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Lawrence, thank you. Thank you.
The Reverend Al Sharpton is going to get tonight's last word.